Hello and welcome to Education and Training.
The following podcast has been designed to support your understanding of the fear of failure and to learn how to mitigate against its effects. The fear of failure leads to risk aversion, so how do we mitigate against it? Well, in life, we would all rather avoid failure and achieve success. The fear of failing has been identified as one of the most significant causes of failure, and we must develop ways of recognising this. Watch the following clip and see if you can recognise any fear of failure. Certainly not. What the individual in the clip possessed was a positive attitude towards learning and the grit and determination to continue. The following workshop has been divided into two activities. Activity 1 will discuss the concept of fear and failure and look at some of the most common causes. And Activity 2 will explain how to develop a growth mindset and finishes with an activity where you can identify any of your areas for improvement or something you want to overcome. Activity 1. Winston Churchill's quote, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that count," sums up overcoming the fear of failure nicely. So the objectives we're going to look at are firstly to define what failure means and what fear means, understand what causes the fear of failure, and then we'll discuss how we can mitigate against that. Let's have a look at failure. Failure is the state or condition of not meeting an intended outcome and is viewed as the opposite to success. In order to mitigate against failure and achieve success, the factors that lead to failure must be identified. Examining failure, however, is problematic, as the criteria for failure must be determined and objective if an accurate assessment is to be made. In human beings, failure is subjective and difficult to determine. One person may view a situation as a success, whilst another may perceive the same situation as a failure. Therefore, failure is specific to an individual's beliefs. Fear, is an emotional response induced by a perceived threat that consequently leads to a change in behaviour, such as fleeing, hiding, or becoming immobilised from perceived traumatic events. In humans, the process of understanding and learning assists with being capable of controlling fear. Therefore, fear can be judged as rational and appropriate, or irrational and inappropriate. An irrational fear is a phobia, and the fear of failure is called a tachyphobia. Everything You Ever Wanted is on the Other Side of Fear by George Adair. So let's look at some of the causes of the fear of failure. Well, firstly, criticism. Criticism is the practice of judging the merits and faults of an issue or particular performance. The objective of criticism is to provide an evaluation or corrective exercise that can occur in any area of human life. Criticism can therefore be presented in various forms and includes positive and negative aspects. Criticism can be a cause of a tachyphobia, either through the sufferer experiencing excessive negative criticism or the sufferer having an adverse view of any criticism. It is common for tachyphobia sufferers to have been subjected to overly critical, unsupportive parents, colleagues, friends, or partners. This kind of criticism does not achieve the objective and often leads to the individual feeling undermined or humiliated. Excessive criticisms in childhood can lead to the sufferer's condition becoming extreme and difficult to overcome in adulthood. Most people will experience some form of negative criticism in their lives and will benefit from considering the aspects being presented. This is usually due to the individually having a positive outlook on criticism, and the criticism being constructive. A problem occurs when criticism is not constructive and succeeds in adversely affecting the individual's performance. Many people view criticism as negative and find it difficult to be objective regarding the aspects being presented. This can come from the individual having a high self-esteem or not being susceptible to receiving criticism, and leads to the individual trivializing the aspects being presented. An effective way to mitigate against the effects of criticism is to understand how effective feedback can be conducted. This understanding can lead to the individual being able to identify with excessive negative criticism and constructive criticism. The atikiphobia sufferer can then dismiss destructive criticism, which will likely assist with improving their self-esteem. Moreover, identifying genuine constructive criticism is a sure way of improving performance, which will increase self-esteem and mitigate against the fear of failure. Failure needs to be recognized as a learning process and not a defeat. There are many different methods that describe how to conduct effective feedback. Methods for simple feedback, such as the sandwich method, are conducted by the individual receiving positive aspects first, then an area to work on, followed by another positive aspect in order to leave the individual feeling motivated. There are more complex methods such as the GROW method, which assists with determining goals that are realistic and consider options for achieving the goals and aims to create the will for the individual to achieve success. Gaining an understanding of and utilizing these methods have a significant impact on mitigating against the fear of failure. Trauma, or psychological trauma, is a type of damage to the mind that occurs as a result of a severely distressing event. Trauma is often the result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or integrate the emotions involved with that experience. Individuals, depending on their experience and resilience to such events, can perceive trauma differently. Not all people react negatively to psychological trauma, and in some cases people become better at dealing with traumatic events as a result of their experience. This is usually due to the individual having a positive mindset and identifying a learning experience from the trauma. However, in atikiphobia sufferers, trauma exacerbates their condition. Examples of psychological trauma can range from a simple poor performance case to severe psychological episodes. Many people have a genuine fear of public speaking. This is often a mild form of atikiphobia. Most people gain confidence from their positive experiences. However, on occasion, some individuals cannot perform during public speaking events because of their fear of failure. They often feel the same way as they did during their first experience and do not develop in confidence. A negative experience usually compounds the problem, and individuals find it increasingly difficult to overcome and will avoid public speaking. A severe psychological episode can often lead to post-traumatic stress disorder and complicates mitigating against the fear of failure. Remedies for psychological trauma can range from reinforcing positive thinking to cognitive behavioral therapy delivered by a professional practitioner. Perfectionism is a personality trait portrayed by an individual who strives for perfection and sets exceptionally high performance standards for themselves. Moreover, perfectionists are highly self-critical. Psychologists agree that there are many positive and negative aspects to perfectionism. The negative aspect to perfectionism is that it can drive people to attempt to achieve an unattainable goal, and as a result, individuals perceive that they have failed to achieve their goal. The positive aspect can lead perfectionists to continue to persevere until their goal is achieved and ultimately leading to a perception of success. There are two different types of perfectionism. There is normal perfectionism or neurotic perfectionism. Normal perfectionists are more inclined to pursue perfection without compromising their self-esteem and derive pleasure from their efforts. Neurotic perfectionists are prone to strive for unrealistic goals and feel dissatisfied when they cannot reach them. This often leads to a fear of failure, and the atikiphobia sufferer can be classified as a neurotic perfectionist. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be an effective treatment for atikiphobia sufferers in reducing anxiety, self-consciousness, and perfectionism. Cognitive behavioral therapy assists the individual in recognizing irrational thinking and can find an alternative way to approach the situation. Cognitive behavioral therapy is intended to help the person understand that it is acceptable to fail and failure is merely a lesson learned. Activity 2. Well, how do we mitigate against the fear of failure? Well, Dr. Carol Dweck has been conducting research into students' attitude towards failure for the past 30 years. Dweck coined the terms fixed mindset and growth mindset to describe the underlying beliefs people have about learning and intelligence. A fixed mindset is when students believe their basic abilities, their intelligence, their talents are just fixed traits. They have a certain amount and that's that. And then their goal becomes to look smart all the time and never look dumb. In a growth mindset, students understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They don't necessarily think everybody's the same or anybody can be Einstein, but they believe everyone can get smarter if they work at it. A growth mindset is arguably the most effective way to mitigate against atikiphobia. Individuals with a growth mindset will be more likely to continue to work hard even when failure occurs. The growth mindset individual will view failure as a learning process and take actions in order to address the aspects that caused failure. Individuals with a growth mindset admire other achievers and will learn from their mistakes and will not fear making mistakes, as they understand that success only comes through learning. For growth mindset individuals, failure is learning. People with a fixed mindset tend to avoid challenges, or they lie to themselves that the challenge is real. For example, somebody who thoroughly enjoys running setting themselves a challenge to complete a run, when their real challenge might be to overcome their poor literacy skills. Whereas someone with a growth mindset can see that in themselves, can see that they're avoiding what the real challenge is, has a desire to overcome these obstacles and not to give up easily. They see the effort that they're putting in as a way to learning and not being fruitless or a waste of time. For me, a good way of assessing within yourself whether you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset is how you perceive criticism. If you've been given constructive criticism and you find it difficult to accept, then there's a good indication that you are developing a fixed mindset. That's not to say that if you have been given criticism that's poorly constructed and it hasn't made you feel too good and you've rebelled against it, that you have a fixed mindset. But certainly, If you've been given criticism by a mentor in an O jar, in an S jar, or something that is relevant and you've dismissed it, then maybe you need to consider how you take on board feedback. Another element is the success of others. And sometimes, although people are reluctant to admit this, seeing the success of others can be threatening towards us. And if you feel that way, that is a good indication that you are developing a fixed mindset. If you admire the success of others and it inspires you, then that is a good indication that you have a growth mindset. Let's now have a look at an exercise that we can do in order to overcome this. This is a performance profile and is a really good exercise to do in order to provide you with a visual image of the important attributes and how good or bad you are at those attributes. So I've done one for myself. I'm a late entry officer, and on the left hand side you see all the attributes that I argue are really important to becoming a good late entry officer. For example, you don't get along without a good career laugh, and it's really important to make those around you feel valued. So it's something I work on every day. I spend about 30 minutes in the morning laughing at myself in the mirror just to make sure that that attribute is good. Now, I've gone through all my attributes and I've given myself, in the dark green, a score of where I think I am. The light green is the gap where I think I can improve on these attributes in order to be better. And as you see, with the career laughing, I've left a little gap because I don't think I'm quite there yet and I need to continue to work on it. Now, what's useful about this exercise is you can compare your opinion of yourself with a trusted colleague, peer, a superior, or a critical friend that will give you a better reflection of who you are and what you are like at these abilities. So I did this with my reporting officer and asked him to see whether he agreed with my assessment. And what I have found is that actually my career laugh is way better than I'm giving myself credit for. And what I was probably doing is leading myself into a comfort zone, which is what we often do. We often continue to practice the things we're already good at because it makes us feel good about ourselves, rather than focusing on the things we're not good at and really developing those. So as you can see, if I now look at my performance profile, I can see where the biggest gaps are and make a judgment on what I should really do in order to develop as a person overall. The last part of this workshop is for you to construct your own performance profile. You'll have about 15 minutes to list the 10 attributes and then score each attribute. Then discuss them with a critical friend to see whether they agree with yours and see if there's any room for negotiating your attribute up or down. Then identify your weakest attribute. This is the one that you're going to go away and provide a plan for and work on improving. And you're going to prepare a short brief on this, which should include the attribute itself, the title for it, why it is important, and why it is your weakest attribute, and what you can do to improve it. This exercise works really well when people show a little humility and are honest. And whoever else is in the room providing you with feedback, please be constructive, and you will all take away a lot from this on what you can really do to be a better all-round performer in whatever attribute you choose. In summary, failure can be expressed as an unintended result. Fear is a significant factor that causes failure. The main aspects that cause a fear of failure are excessive criticism, psychological trauma, and perfectionism. A sufferer of fear of failure can mitigate against these factors providing they identify with having symptoms of atychiphobia. Reinforcing positive thinking and cognitive behavioral therapy are factors that assist with mitigating against the fear of failure. The most effective way to avoid developing atychiphobia and mitigating against it is to develop a growth mindset. A growth mindset leads an individual to recognize fear as a learning process, and therefore the fear is removed.